What's up everyone? I'm Margaret, your CodeWizards HQ instructor. Today we're going to learn about Python functions and we're going to jump right into the syntax, so let's go. So what's a function? We see an example here called do something. Functions are blocks of reusable code that perform a single action, and they have a set of instructions that prompts the computer to perform some sort of action. So do something wants the computer to do something. And when we name functions, they're usually going to be a short verb or action that ends with the parentheses at the end. So how we know that it's a function is that it has those open and closed parentheses at the end of it. Let's take a look at how we can create our own functions. So here we're going to create a function, first defining it using this def keyword. So def add puppy, open and close parentheses, and the colon at the end. So use def followed by the name of the function and some open and close parentheses. Next, our code inside of our function is going to have 4 spaces in the front. So indent your code inside of your function by 4 spaces. So our code here is puppy image, which we know is a variable, equals the function add image, and we're going to add an image of puppy.png at size 100. Then we've got position element, a function that's going to position our puppy image in the center. All right, so there's our function definition. It's called add puppy. Now when we want to use this function, we're going to call the function. We're going to call the function by name. So we're going to say add puppy, open and close parentheses, and then it's going to execute those 2 lines of code inside of our add puppy function definition. So when we call add puppy, it's going to create a puppy image variable and then position that puppy image in the center. So that's how you define a variable and then call it. There are some rules for how we're going to name our functions. First, we can start with a letter or an underscore. It can have numbers. It can be any length that we want, but it can't use any of the reserved Python keywords, all right? So there are some reserved keywords. If you want to find the full list, you can go ahead and Google it. I think there's about 33 reserved keywords that you can't use, but everything else is fair game and you can use that to define your function. Here, this is how we define a function that's going to have arguments in it. And it's pretty much the same as defining any other function, except for that inside of the open and closed parentheses, we're going to use some variables. So here we've got var_1 and var_2. So until we call the function, we don't know what the value of those variables is going to be. So when we call the function name down here, we're going to tell it variable 1 should be value 1 and variable 2 should be value 2. And once it has that information, it can perform the function. Putting that all together, let's define this function called add numbers, all right? So here we have our keyword def, add numbers, open and close parentheses with our colon at the end. And then inside of our add numbers, we have 2 arguments. We want to know x, comma, y. So what are x and y? Inside of our function definition, we're going to have a variable called total, and total is going to equal x plus y. So whatever x plus y is, that's going to become our total variable. And what we're going to return, what we're going to show here is that total variable. All right, so let's say we have a variable called results, and we want it to equal add numbers, and x and y are 1 and 2. All right, so our arguments, the information we're going to give it is 1 and 2. That means x equals 1 and y equals 2. So inside of our function here, we're going to say total equals, and if x equals 1 and y equals 2, then what should total be? What's 1 plus 2? 3, right? So total now becomes 3, and we're going to return that number 3. Let's try with some different numbers, all right? So let's pretend that add numbers is actually 5 and 6. So if we run add numbers and where x is 5 and y is 6, now we have total equals 5 plus 6. So what is total then in this case? 5 plus 6, right? We're going to get a total that's 11. So hopefully you guys can see how these x and y arguments work and how we're going to give it some information when we call that function. Final activity, let's define our own function and call it. And we want to write a function that subtracts 2 numbers, has 2 arguments, and has a variable. So let's give that a try. Hop on over to your code editor. I'm using the CodeWizards HQ editor, but any text editor that you have that you like, you can use. We also have the Trinket editor linked in the article. So let's start with our DEF keyword. So def subtract, open and close your parentheses, and then use a colon. Now we want two arguments. So inside of our parentheses, let's go ahead and use num1, comma, num2. Those are going to be our two arguments that stand for number 1 and number 2. Now inside of our function definition, make sure you indent 4 spaces, and we're going to write the first line, which is going to be a variable total equals num1 minus num2. So here we're doing an equation, num1 minus num2, and we're saving that number in a variable called total. Now, what information do we want this function to give back to us? It's that number total, which is the result of our subtraction. So let's say return and this variable total. Now, if we actually want to use our subtract function, we need to call it. So outside of the function definition, meaning let's go all the way back to the left of our code, we're going to say subtract, open and close parentheses. Remember, that's how we call our subtract function. Now let's choose 2 numbers to use. Let's say number 1 is 5 and number 2 is 1. Now, if we put that into our function when we call it num1 is 5, num2 is 1, so our total is going to be what? What's 5 minus 1? 4, right? So it's going to return a 4 to us. Now, if we want to show this on the screen, then we're going to have to put this into a variable. And let's say our final equals this number, and then let's print out that final number on our screen. So we're going to use a print function, and we're going to say print final. All right, so when we run this, let's see what happens. I'm going to save that. And let's preview it. Ta-da! We get 4, right? And that's a result of our subtract function, is this final number, which is 4. So give that a try, see if it works for you. And a quick note, these 2 lines of code at the beginning of my program, you guys aren't probably going to need those depending on which text editor you're using. That's some special code that we're using for our CodeWizards HQ editor. That's it. We've defined our own function and we've called it. So now throughout your code, anytime that you want to subtract numbers, you can use that subtract function. All right, now the next lesson, we're going to be talking about Python lists. And to keep learning, make sure that you like and subscribe to our channel. You can always find live online Python classes with excellent instructors at CodeWizards HQ. Hopefully you guys had fun learning about functions. I'll see you in the next class.